Hi, everyone. I'm Sterling Hedgpeth. I'm the programming manager for both the DocLands Film Festival and the Mill Valley Film Festival. And on behalf of the California Film Institute, I want to give a big welcome to Chris Smith, who's director of Senior, which you just saw here today.
Hello.
Chris,
Thanks.
it was an absolutely lovely film. Thank you so much for sharing it with us today.
Oh, yeah. Thanks.
How did you first get involved in this? Even before it was a production, it was a project. How did you first get involved in this project?
I had a meeting at Robert Downey Jr.'s production company, which he has with his wife Susan, called Team Downey. And I threw out the idea to Emily, who works with them, an idea of, does Robert have any interest in the documentary or the documentary space? And they came back pretty quickly saying no, but he did think somebody should film his father. So that kind of started this adventure where Kevin and I started spending time with Senior and learning, getting acquainted with his films. And I think at first we thought it was going to be a portrait of a New York, maverick filmmaker. And it obviously, things changed and evolved and it ended up becoming the film that we have now.
Now, obviously, both Roberts Sr. and Jr. Have incredible creative ideas, and they also had very specific ideas about how the film should probably look or feel.
Right.
What was it like collaborating with both of them for this film?
They both are different. They're very different. Junior, it was really interesting because you go into a documentary situation, you don't know what the expectation is. I didn't know if they'd want a lot of crew and lighting and all these different things. But a couple of days before we started filming, we got a note that just said we couldn't bring any crew, which was, unnerving in the sense that I hadn't filmed anything myself for years and years and years. And so I had to learn how to basically shoot again, which in the end, looking at the film that was made, you kind of can't imagine it being done any other way. Like, the intimacy is what I think makes it work. And so, Robert, I think, instinctually knew that is what the film would have to be for it to work. With Senior, I don't know, but my assumption is that he was just excited that there were people with cameras around, and that regardless of what we thought we were doing, that he had other plans in mind. And so, I think that there was some tension near the beginning of I definitely think he wanted dailies, he wanted to see stuff. But once he came up with this idea of making his own version of the movie, which Kevin, graciously sort of took the lead on that, that kind of freed us up to be able to make our version of the documentary, because he was singularly focused on his version of the film.
Obviously, because he had such a background in doing things really off the cuff and very, 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 very bare bones, was there kind of some effort to create a sense of trust very quickly between you? Because obviously he'd be sharing a lot more about himself than he's used to doing.
I think I remember him saying about we actually asked him right at the beginning. It was in a cut for a while, do you trust us? And his first answer was no. And then he laughed. But he's like, look, if Robert sent you guys over, I assume you're good guys, or something like that, which is very Senior. But I think the fact that we were recommended through Robert, I think he felt like at that point he was all in.
And what did you learn about him from visiting his work and excursioning into the underground film scene in New York that maybe you only had a passing familiarity with?
Well, I think for me, in my ignorance, I started making movies in the 90s. When I looked to independent filmmakers before me, I looked at Jim Jarmusch, Errol Morris, people that were doing it, in the 80s. And that to me felt like where it started. And it was so interesting learning about Senior's work. I knew about Putney Swope. And I think a lot of people had if you went to film school. But the rest of his work I wasn't familiar with. And so it was really exciting to sort of see this whole universe of people that were operating in New York. The one thing I'll say about Senior is that if you know Senior and you know his work, what was exciting to me was that if you see a clip from a senior movie, you know it's a senior movie. And I feel like there's so many things that exist today on TV and streaming services that you don't. There's no authorship in the sense of who made it. And I feel like anytime you see a clip from a senior movie, it's pretty clear that there's one that could only come from one person.
This is always a dangerous thing to assume, but did he have all the licensing rights to his films as an independent filmmaker that you were able to use?
No, he didn't have any. I don't think he didn't think it mattered. And it took us like months and months, almost, a year to like untangle. I think Senior was all about the work and didn't really care about anything else. But it was definitely like a lot of work for us to like try to piece together, and also to try to find. All Senior had was those DVDs that were on the coffee table, and he's holding them, and like half of them worked, half of them didn't. It was pretty late in the day that we found out that, I think it was through Scorsese and the Academy, or at least definitely the Academy, had restored Putney Swope from the 35mm print with a new 4K transfer, and it was like, it was like covering, taking the dust off of an old master in a way. It was like, because all we had was this like kind of really crummy low res version of Putney Swope for the longest time while we were editing. And you could like see people's expressions. There was so much more you could take from the film, and I think it gave us a lot more respect for him in terms of, I think you definitely knew his sensibility and their reverence, but when you actually saw the quality of the filmmaking, it was exciting to sort of see that restored to what it was originally supposed to be.
And you even talk about the film being part of the National Registry of Films in the library.
He does. Yeah. It was, it's funny. There's things that Senior I could never quite figure him out. Like, you would think that wouldn't matter to him, but you could tell that it kind of did. Like, he definitely kept you guessing in terms of like his thing and stuff. But I think the thing that surprised me the most was looking at his work. I assumed that it would be very different than the person that we met. I assumed he'd be kind of confrontational or like cantankerous or kind of gruff, and he was the exact opposite of that.
Talking about footage, you mentioned that you have the one Dick Cavett interview in particular, but was there a lot of other footage of him doing contemporaneous interviews at all? No,
we found one other old black and white interview from the CBC, but there wasn't a lot from him. And as Robert says in the movie, he was hesitant to try to tell people what, he wanted to let the audience like come to their own conclusions about his movies and what the meaning was. But it's interesting, the very first two interviews that we found, like he's offering a lot more. And after that period, everything else was like, I don't know, I just make it, and it's all just fun and there's no meaning. But what I loved about that last scene with from Greaser's Palace was that, Robert earlier says like, you don't want to say what the meaning is, but when we went back and looked at that clip, Susan had sent it to me out of the blue a couple months before we finished. It was so clear to me that was the ending, because he did tell us what it was all about, which like in such a senior way, it was codified. But to me, when I saw it with like distance and perspective after working on the movie for a couple of years, it was so clear that it was like, be nice to each other, which it was interesting, because it was like, it felt so senior to me in that moment. And we were so excited to be able to put that at the end of the movie, because kind of gave him the last word, which was nice and sort of brought you back into his world and universe.
Now, this film happened, and you never really hear much about it, but it's very obvious with the masks and all the other kind of protocols going on, that this happened in the middle of COVID.
Right.
When did it happen in the timeline of the production, and how did it change things? Not only obviously in keeping the crew safe and everyone safe, but how did it change things in terms of you reshaping the film?
Well, we started in the summer of 2019, so obviously the world was a very different place. Robert always wanted to go to New York and sort of have this dialogue with his dad, and that was, we couldn't do it, and so Robert was in LA, his dad was in New York. And that ended up leading to this idea of doing these phone calls, which we were able to set up cameras in both places. And those really, provided the spine of the movie in a way, but it was, I'm happy with what the movie was. I think everything happens for a reason, but I always wonder like what that dialogue would have been like had it happened, if we hadn't been interrupted from COVID.
Was the movie, the movie ends up being incredibly reflective about the past, about art, about demons. Was that what you were expecting? Is that something that was that a thread that came up unpredictably for your end that you found a resonant theme that you could latch onto?
I think, to me, I went into it with no preconceived notion of what this could be. And meeting Senior, it became very quickly apparent that that was like the right way to approach it, because you were never going to get anything that you think you were going to get. It wasn't going to go down that way. And so I think we were really open to the process. I remember in the very first day that we filmed, we were going through his catalog of work, or the movies that he had made, and he talked about the last movie he made was a documentary in Philadelphia called Rittenhouse Square. And he said about that movie that, that they learned very early on to trust the process, basically trust anything and anything could happen. And I felt like that was like that line, I think, really stuck with Kevin and I, where we were like, let's just sort of be open-minded to whatever direction or whatever form this might take. Because I think like you couldn't not make a Senior movie without thinking that you had to have some, the spirit of a Senior movie, like I think we definitely didn't want people to walk out, which when he was working with Kevin, he said they would be unsuccessful if half the audience didn't walk out of the movie when it screened. So I definitely think we weren't necessarily going for that, but we definitely wanted to keep some of the irreverence that, he brought to his work.
Robert, at the beginning of the film, says that, nobody knows the hour of the day, and obviously Senior's sense of mortality was something that you had to take into account. But did that conception of his mortality and how quickly he might deteriorate, did that come as a surprise, or was that something that you were anticipating as the possibility when you were continuing to make the film?
I mean, it definitely became something we had to take into consideration as we went on, but at the very beginning, that was definitely not something we were thinking about. Like, we definitely thought our movie was about Robert Downey Sr. and his body of work and his life. It evolved into a movie about a father and a son just because of the nature of what unfolded. But, and I was like an optimist. I was like, he's going to come through. It's all going to be okay. Like kept thinking that. And Robert, I don't know if it was a self-defense mechanism, but I think he was very pragmatic about the direction that things were going and that this would be part of the movie. Him and his dad would talk about it. That's what, it was, they definitely shared a similar sensibility in terms of sense of humor. Like, I think Robert would say to his dad at one point, like, we don't really have an end of the movie until, that. And so like they, but it was great spending time with them, like they were two larger than life personalities, but like when you spent time with them, there was something very relatable and very human about it. My dad had died of Parkinson's, and so I'd gone through, different, but we had that experience in our family, and so it was. I thought it was just really brave of both of them to allow that to be, documented.
Well, speaking of that, there's also a lot of bravery talking about issues that are very sensitive, not only mortality and loss, but also substance abuse. How comfortable were they in talking about the past and the perceived sins or damage that they might have caused?
Nothing was off limits. Like, we were able to ask questions about anything we wanted. I think one of the challenges was, what can we bring to that dialogue and conversation that felt new? I think it's well-worn territory. It's been covered ad nauseum. So I think for us, it was like more how they talked about that in and around it was more interesting to me than trying to get them to say what they, Robert had said in interviews in the past, and so, but I definitely I remember early on that Robert was, I don't want to paint, make it that everything was great, because it wasn't. But at the same time, I think he was that they had an undeniable chemistry and a bond with each other, that, and a lot of respect for each other. And I think Senior was proud of his son. And I think at this point in your life, do you want to hold on to the negativity, or do you want to just sort of try to, make the most of the time that's left? I think Susan said something like that. And I think that was the case, but, it was an underlying, element that existed for sure.
Right. Documentaries are typically an embarrassment of riches when it comes to footage, and you have to take things down to focus and to hone it down to its center.
Yeah.
Was there? Tell us first of all how long it took to cut, and any kind of challenges you ran into in the cut.
We started cutting as soon as we started shooting. So we had edits within 6 months that were not good, and the movie wasn't working, and then it changed. I think one of the biggest challenges we had is that we started making one movie which was about Senior and his work, and we started editing that movie, and then what the movie was changed, but the edit didn't so much in terms of its overall understanding of the evolution of the story. And it was only at the end of last year that we kind of had this revelation, which is so, every movie, when you get it done, at least from your own perspective, the edit feels really obvious, and you wonder why it took you 2 years to figure out. But in this case, there was we were working with an editor named Dan Kohler, and there was kind of this light bulb moment of if we use all of Senior's movies to inform his life journey, that we don't really need to tell his autobiography of his work. If people want to learn more about his movies, they can look them up, they can watch them. But what we were interested in was, Putney Swope is about Senior having the first amount of success and recognition. Pound was about Junior. Greaser's Palace is about the family and Robert's mom. And, then we go into Two Tons of Turquoise, which is kind of dealing with addiction. So for us, the movies became vehicles with which we could reflect on the life. And once we sort of figured that out, which seems obvious, but it eluded us for a long time, it opened up, the pathway to sort of figuring out what the movie, ultimately ended up becoming.
Were there any stories or anecdotes from either the Roberts or from, say, Norman Lear or Alan Arkin, that you really would have loved to use that you had to cut as much as painful?
Yeah, there was so much. You can't not make a movie and not have an hour of material that you love. I think it's, I learned pretty early on that you have to ultimately, for the good of the movie, you have to lose things. And yeah, it was frustrating in this case because Robert, both of them are so charismatic. There were great moments and bites and stories. I think Senior told this great story about getting court-martialed 3 times, and the last time he was on guard duty, but he put a bucket with a mop and was out partying, and they found, and that sent him to the thing where that's how he got to writing. But there were so many things that are just, they're tangents, and you just go down these roads, and I think we were determined to try to keep the movie at 90 minutes. I liked that idea for this. I thought, it would move well, and it wouldn't overstay our welcome. So, but yeah, there was a lot of things. We did full interviews with Norman Lear and with Alan Arkin. There's a couple of bites with them, but they were so great. And obviously with both Roberts, there was a ton of great stuff that was left on the floor.
At what point did you make the aesthetic decision to have the film in black and white?
The black and white was decided really quickly, I think after the first shoot. Senior was very insistent upon us trying to think differently and try to embrace, like, I don't know, just like not doing the things the way that you've always done them. And I think pretty early on, we were like, well, why don't we try, like, in that spirit, making it black and white? And like, what we learned very quickly was that in looking at all of Senior's early work, there was something really nice about being in black and white, because you entered his world. You know, like, all of his early films are in black and white, and it feels like the New York that Senior knew. And so for us, it felt like an opportunity to sort of take you kind of metaphorically into that space. And then when Senior switches to color, it felt really exciting, because those films like really jump off the screen because you're like desensitized to color. So, you know, when he makes that change and the cinematography is elevated, you really feel it, because it's, you know, because of the black and white.
Awesome. Is there any final words you want to say about the film to our patron base, our audience?
Well, thank you for coming. That's like, you know, anytime people watch something in a, you know, at an event or wherever, you know, anyway, just really appreciative, because it's like there's more stuff out there than ever. And so, you know, and it's in, I don't know, I hope, you know, a lot of people that we talked to after making the movie, there's a siren going, which is in spirit of Senior. We'll just keep talking through it. But the, you know, that people connected to it. I think Robert at the Telluride screening asked how many people had gone through a similar experience with a family member, either directly or indirectly. And it was like a third of the audience. And so it was really nice to sort of be able to show this with a group of people and sort of have this communal experience around, you know, something that was challenging. My hope is that it was, you know, that you got to know Senior, you cared about him, that it might be sad, but hopefully ultimately that it's uplifting in the sense that you got to meet, you know, I feel like it's, as the world becomes more homogenized, truly unique individuals like Senior are harder and harder to find. And I feel like it was, I was really excited that we got to spend time with him while he was still, you know, healthy, and captured some little glimpse of his essence. And I hope that people, you know, enjoyed meeting him as well.
It was a wonderful film. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. Good luck with the film in its future, and good luck with all your future projects.
All right, thanks so much.